Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Glad you're here. Hey, friendly reminder to download our free app on your smartphone. Just search for The First TV. It's right there. Everyone's shows, including Bill O'Reilly's, now right there on the app. And it's all on demand. So if you only catch part of the show, you can go back and watch all the rest of it. It's a super easy, smooth app. It's great. You can turn your phone, you can close your phone and then still have it play in the background podcast style. It's awesome. So The First TV in the App Store. All right, I want to start off with something that I haven't seen anywhere. See what you think. This is a tough conversation, but there's going to be a second wave. No, we're not talking about COVID. Have you ever in your life seen something come in harder in the news and then leave the headlines faster than COVID in all your life? It's amazing. I'm not talking about COVID. I'm talking about a second wave of George Floyd protests in a couple of months when this trial takes place, whenever it does. I don't know how long these things take. It could take a year or so, right? Second wave of COVID may or may not happen, don't know. But a second wave of George Floyd protests, I think, will happen, and I'll tell you why. There is a good chance that this cop is found not guilty. And that's going to be a huge problem. Of all the police brutality examples that we've had over the years, there's never been a more clear video than this one, right? There's never been a more obvious injustice than this one. It's a long video. It's painful to watch. It's clear, right? It's not like some grainy security footage from far away across the street. It couldn't be more obvious. There's no even like ambiguity of in the heat of the moment, like a passion moment, a split-second decision, and you're trying to put yourself in the mind of a cop who's fearing for his life. There's none of that. It's so obvious that this cop killed George Floyd by leaning on his neck for 8 minutes and 43 seconds. But this cop may be found not guilty of third-degree murder. And I want to talk about why. Before I do, major disclaimer here. I'm not saying he should be found not guilty. Please hear me. I don't want any emails. Oh, Slater thinks that this cop should be not. Slater thinks this cop did a good thing. We preach nuance on this show all the time. The nuance here is that it's not that I think he should be found not guilty, but that I think he very well could be found not guilty. And the reason is fentanyl. I haven't heard a lot of coverage on this at all. People paying attention to the riots and all that stuff. But there were 2 autopsies that were done and released the other day. One by privately done, and then the county one. And I don't know the weight that each of them are going to have in the courtroom, but we can talk about the county. They're not that different. They're a little different in some ways, but they're not that different. But the county one we're going to talk about here says he died of cardiopulmonary arrest. If there's any doctors watching, I think that's different from a heart attack. I don't know why, but for some reason I think that's a little different than a heart attack, or it's like a type of heart attack or something. But he had arteriosclerotic and hypertensive heart disease. So he had like a thinning or a hardening of the artery walls. But the big one is fentanyl intoxication and recent methamphetamine use. And I heard that and I thought, oh no. Defense lawyer is going to take that all the way to the bank. Let's talk about fentanyl. It's going to be a huge problem for the Floyd family lawyers. So there's as many as 30,000 people a year die from fentanyl overdose. So opioids are 70% of drug overdose deaths, and 67% of those deaths are synthetic opioids. And fentanyl would be one of those. It's one of the main causes of drug overdoses in America. I read an article on NPR. They say that it's more than 100 times more potent than morphine. And you put just a pinch of fentanyl into a bag of heroin, and you have a batch that's capable of producing 20 times the euphoria and pain relief of just heroin alone. We could do a ton of stuff on fentanyl. Maybe one day we will. The point is it's very bad. It's very deadly. It mostly comes from China, by the way, and it kills people. So the first thing a defense lawyer is going to do to the jury is say, members of the jury, how do you know it wasn't the fentanyl that killed George Floyd? How do you know? Beyond a reasonable doubt. How do you know that it wasn't the fentanyl and the meth? Now listen, don't be mad at me. I'm not saying the jury should let him off, just letting you know what the defense is going to do. Now, There's another aspect of this. The fentanyl, we don't know how much, when he took it, how much was in his system, the effects that it has on him. But there's something very interesting about this super clear video that we've all seen. Can we show the picture? All we need is the picture of this. I don't need to see more. Okay, so you think, gosh, that's horrible. You look at that and you're like, that is so clear, so obvious. But even that picture, the clearest police brutality picture I've ever seen, anyone's ever seen, you still don't see the whole thing. Because Floyd is next to the car, you only see the cop on his neck. You don't see anything else. And I just assumed that there's nothing else going on because that's all you would need to see. But there's more to that scene. You may have seen this by now. There was another video from someone across the street. Can we play that, guys? And when I first saw this video, I saw it and I said, wait a second. There's 3 cops on top of him? There's the cop on his neck, which we see, and that was all we ever saw. But there's also one on his back and then one on his legs. Why are there 3 cops on top of him? Did you wonder that when you saw that video too? And so first I just want to pause again. Like when you saw the first video, I didn't even know there were other cops on top of him, which is just an interesting like mind tweak that like, oh, you think you see everything and you still don't even see everything. But then once you realize there's 3 cops on top of him, you're like, why? Why are there 3 cops on? What the heck is going on? Apparently, one of the results of taking fentanyl could be, depending on what else it's mixed with and other variables too, but one of them can be a superhuman strength. There's a mixture of fentanyl and some other drug that's literally called Hulk. Do you remember a couple years ago, bath salts being in the news for a while? Same kind of thing. It can give you superhuman strength. In certain cases, it can take, well, I'll tell you, Reason.com, they asked this question. They said, how many grown men does it take to restrain someone who's on bath salts? How many grown men does it take to restrain someone who's on bath salts? And they said, according to Armando Aguilar, who's the president of the Miami Fraternal Order of Police, 6. It takes 6 people to restrain someone on bath salts. This was the cop who did not need toxicology tests to know that Rudy Eugene, AKA the Miami Zombie, was under the influence of bath salts when he attacked Ronald Poppo. Do you remember that this was the guy who ate another guy's face? Do you remember that? I don't know, it was like 4 or 5 years or something like that. It was in Miami, and this guy was on bath salts, and he ate another person's face. And the cops couldn't restrain him. He says this one cop says it took 6 officers to restrain the individual. 6. So these cops in Minneapolis, I'm sure they know what to look for to see if someone's high on something. Whoever called the police said they thought he was drunk and acting out of control. We see another security camera footage of Floyd in the car. And there's some sort of scuffle between him and the police, and you can't really see what's going on because you can't see through the car door. But something may have happened there that made the police think that they were dealing with someone on fentanyl or on bath salts or some drug that can make someone of just superhuman strong. And apparently George Floyd is 6'6". So you see the video of 3 cops on top of it, and it looks insane. But I bet if you ask police officers, I bet they'd say, yeah, sometimes I've been in cases where you need 5, 6 officers to restrain someone who's on these drugs. Listen, I'm sharing that. I hope it's coming across like I want this to be so. I want this guy locked away forever. But the more I'm seeing this stuff, it's like, oh, this is going to be way more difficult than I wish it would be. Last point on this, he was charged with 3rd-degree murder. So my understanding is, I'm not a lawyer here, but the 1st degree is like premeditated. I planned for a week on how I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna execute this murder, I'm gonna kill you, right? 2nd is like passion, like in the moment, you didn't plan on it, but then you murder someone. 3rd degree, there's not many states have 3rd-degree murders. Only 5 or 6 states even have it. Minnesota is one of them. And there's a couple aspects of 3rd-degree murder that are interesting. First, there can be no accessories to a 3rd-degree murder. So it's unlikely that those other 3 police officers will ever be charged with anything. So that's the first thing. But here's the text of a third-degree murder. Or here's the law. It's whoever, without intent to affect the death of any person, causes the death of another by perpetrating an act imminently dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind. Every time I hear the word evincing, I have to look it up because I can never, revealing, that's right, revealing a depraved mind without regard for human life. Guilty of murder in the third degree may be sentenced no more than 25 years. So first of all, it's only a 25-year max. So even if they throw the book at this guy, it's still only 25 years, which seems not enough. And I probably wouldn't make people that happy even if it was just a full sentence. But to me, I watched that video and I think every single human agrees that he is of such a depraved mind, right? He's so callous. Depraved is a good definition. It's like having no morals, morally corrupt, wicked. Yeah, that doesn't seem like depraved mind. Like he's so callous, so casual throughout it all. It's hauntingly evil to me when I watch it. But a good lawyer is gonna make the case that these officers were trained to act that way when someone's on fentanyl or something like that. And here, jury, here's all the times when officers didn't restrain someone that way and the guy got up and caused more people to be hurt. So this officer actually didn't have a depraved mind. He was actually acting with great regard for human life, for his partners, and for the other people around. Again, I'm not saying he should let go. I'm saying there's potentially enough information here that a good lawyer can convince a jury that maybe the officer was justified in what he did and wasn't responsible for the death enough to warrant him going to jail. And I'm sure there's a ton more information that good lawyers can use and present and frame and spin to suggest the cop should not go to jail. And if that happens, holy cow. That's very frustrating. I'll leave it there. We'll get back to it, I guess, when the trial starts. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So, I mean this genuinely. I'm not trying to be a jerk about this, I promise. But yesterday was Blackout Tuesday. And I saw a lot of this stuff like white people, you need to do more, saying you're racist isn't enough. What do you want me to do? Maybe that even sounded jerky the way I said that. Let me try it again. I gotta say it, Jen. What do you want me to do? How do I say that without, does that sound jerky? I don't mean that condescendingly. I really don't. What is it you would like me to do? I'm all ears. Now, let me be clear with the question, actually. You can't cop out and say, white people need to, right? You can't do that because it's I can't be black people need, that's ridiculous. Be specific. What do you want a white person to do? It's a very different question. Well, white people need to, you're giving yourself, it's too vague. What do you want a white person to do? And I mean that genuinely. So I want to read a little bit of this article here in San Diego's local paper. This is a woman who lives in Santee. It's this little town outside of San Diego, and it's relevant. I'll get to it in a second. She's a black woman immigrant from Cameroon. She says, when I heard stories of black people getting unjustly killed by cops, I thought they must have heavily contributed to their deaths. But when contradicting video evidence surfaced, I thought those cases were just flukes and had nothing to do with race or a system. One of my main rationales was that in my country of origin, Cameroon, we were almost 100% black, and yet we discriminate against each other constantly. And she goes on, and then she changed her mind. And she realized that America has had a deep history and culture of racism and anti-blackness. It's okay. So as soon as I saw that, I was you've been reading some stuff. This is the intellectualizing of victimization that we've talked about before. The 1619 Project is the latest example, teaching young people that anti-Blackness is systematic in every aspect of America. It's part of our identity down to our core. Our very founding as a country wasn't in 1776, but 1619. The first slaves that came to America, even though they weren't slaves and even though they were not even intended to come to America, but that nuance isn't important. Who cares? Give that person a Pulitzer. So this person's been reading up. And here's how that was proven. Quick background. So Santee, you may remember, is during the lockdowns, there was someone who went to the grocery store wearing a Klan hood. You ever see that? Was on the front of Drudge for a while. That was in Santee, just down the street from San Diego. In the past, it's been known as Klan Tea. Should I not have said that? I mean, I don't know. Last week, before the protest, more than 50 Santee residents and supporters organized a Demonstrate Love car rally. On their vans and cars, they had huge signs, phrases that said, Santee loves everyone, no hate Santee, hate is no home in Santee, sprinkle kindness. All of these are heartwarming and appreciated and perhaps a good start. But as Robin DiAngelo, the author of White Fragility, and a renowned white female educator on issues of racial and social justice, accurately articulates, being nice is not going to end racism. I said, oh, all right. You've been reading Robin DiAngelo. So Robin DiAngelo, you just saw a picture over there. She coined this term, white fragility, in 2011. She wrote that book in 2018. She is one of the top voices of this whole institutional racism stuff. And if I could paraphrase her philosophy here, she believes, and I'm being fair here, I'm not being a jerk. She believes that white people have been socialized, that's her word, socialized, to live with a deeply internalized sense of superiority and entitlement. And you're not aware of it. It's deep down. And as a result, if you're ever questioned about it, right? If your racial worldview is ever questioned or challenged, you perceive it, you white people, you perceive it as an attack on your rightful place in the hierarchy. And this makes it difficult to talk to white people about how your beliefs, your attitudes make you complicit in the perpetuation of institutional racism. That's super articulate. I don't think I can even do that again. So that's her philosophy, her message, her thesis. There are so many massive problems with that. It would take hours to go through, and we will, because this rioting isn't just a one thing, rioting or protesting. This is going to go on forever until we eliminate this cancerous rot that's spreading through higher and now like elementary school. It's all through our schools. So this woman, this immigrant from Cameroon, became infected with this philosophy from Robin DiAngelo and others. Actually, tomorrow on the show, we're going to talk with Dr. Carol Swain, who's amazing. We talked to her before. She's a Black academic professor who's part of the 1776 Unites Project, which is the counter to the 1619 Project. We're talking to her tomorrow, so we'll talk all about this with her and stuff as well. But here's, this woman says, sometimes it appears some people are more invested in the reputation of being non-racist than in actually being non-racist and doing the hard work and transformation needed. So you're more invested in the reputation of being non-racist. So there's the trap. So if I say I'm not racist, then to her and to Robin DiAngelo, I'm only concerned with seeming not racist than I actually care about transforming. I need to do some transforming. And any normal person looks at that and says, well, transform to what? I'm not racist. Whoa, Slater. Why are you getting so defensive? What do you mean? What's your problem? That defensiveness, Slater, that's proof of your racism. You're getting very uncomfortable here, Slater. I called you a racist, and look how vehemently you denied it. That uncomfortableness is because you don't like your power structures being threatened. Right, so they got you in a trap. Nothing you can do. You can only admit you're racist. That's all you can do. If you say you're not, that's proof that you are. So what do you do with that? While many well-intentioned people may practice interpersonal kindness and even interpersonal inclusion, we often unconsciously practice systematic and societal exclusion and oppression of entire groups. What? Like, see how unfair that is? So if I tell you that, see, and this is where they get you, right? Because this is where white people do the, well, I have black friends thing, right? So if I tell you that, which sounds ridiculous, it's such a stupid concept, but if I told you that some of my absolute dearest friends are black, so not only do I have good intentions, but I practice interpersonal kindness and interpersonal inclusion. So I have good intentions and I act on them, but I don't even think that I act on them. They're my best friends. Like I still, no matter what, I still unconsciously practice societal oppression of entire groups. And you can't win. And that's why I started off the segment saying not what do you want white people to do, what do you want a white person to do? Because they're saying you can't win on an individual level, no matter what you do, right? Even if you have good intentions, even if you actually practice them, even if you actually practice inclusion, you yourself, if you practice inclusion, still not good enough. You're still a part of a societal oppression of entire groups. You cannot win. Be careful playing a game you can't win. I got a little more here. She goes on, she says, it's in our laws, our norms, our perceptions. Again, what laws, what norms, what perceptions? You gotta be specific. You can't just throw that stuff out there, right? You can't just say, well, this systematic oppression's in our laws. Okay, well, give me one, right? That seems fair, doesn't it? It's in how we fund public education, how we approve loans and grants. It's the unconscious biases that shape how we recruit and promote. All right, so the unconscious bias, that's on this completely debunked, implicit bias nonsense. We've gone over that a couple times before. It's total nonsense. It's the idea that you subconsciously, the whole remember, we don't have time to go over it now. Maybe we can do it tomorrow if we have time. But they would flash up on a computer screen just this portion of a person's face, and some black people, some white people, and you would on a computer either press the A key or the S key, depending on if you were threatened, or it's like a ridiculous study that said, oh, look, white people are racist deep down inside because it took them longer to press the A key when it was a black person than than a white person. It was like such a stupid study, completely debunked, but that's the basis, that implicit bias is the basis of so much of this stuff about like why you don't hire black people and stuff like that. Where we spend our money, whom we perceive as threatening, whom we choose to give the benefit of the doubt, and whom we decide deserves an instant death sentence simply for perceptions of common infractions. No one deserves a death sentence for any reason, right? Anyway, D'Angelo, one of her main points is that niceness is not courageous. Like if you're just nice to people, that's not good enough. She says, yeah, it's better than being not nice, but justice and racial equality take strategic, intentional, anti-racist action, and it's a lifelong process. And there it is again, you can't win. It's a lifelong process to what end? And this is where it comes down to the fact that these people are Marxists. And they want to ultimately deconstruct, that's the official academic word, they want to deconstruct / destroy every institution we have in America, including and mostly capitalism. That's the main goal here. People have talked about how Antifa and these different anarchists have co-opted the protests, the genuine protests, which by the way, remember yesterday I mentioned there was gonna be 2 protests down the street from me, it's 2 minutes away? There were, and they were both super peaceful and wonderful. I swung by, checked it out, and they were great. Things I'd be proud to be a part of. Actually, they were just wonderful. So you have different groups co-opting these genuine protests and turning them violent, and looters who are hijacking a genuine cause and all that stuff. But you also have race baiters like Robin DiAngelo and others taking what could be a very unifying moment and turning it into a much more divisive conversation than it ever needed to be. And we're gonna do more with Robin DiAngelo tomorrow, but her number one approach is shame. That's what she's all about, shaming you. We'll do it tomorrow. I'll just give you a quick tidbit, but we'll play this video. And she says, white people who ask, what can they do? My question back to you is, how could it be that you are a fully functioning adult and you still don't know what to do? It's like, oh, geez, lady, like that, the first thing you do is shame someone who's genuinely coming to you with a question on how they can do better. And the first thing you do is shame them right? I don't know anyone else who ever does. Like we had Alan Dershowitz on the show the other day, right? On Friday. And I said, hey, Professor, like, what is it? Like, explain the 10th Amendment. He wasn't like, Slater, you're an adult male college graduate and you don't know about the 10th Amendment. You know what I mean? He was like, oh, let me tell you about it, right? That's like a genuine person. She's not a genuine person. She just wants to shame you. So we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But Martin Luther King Jr., he said, I think this was at his Nobel Prize speech. He said, the movement does not seek to liberate Negroes at the expense of the humiliation and enslavement of whites. It seeks no victory over anyone, and that's what people like Robin DiAngelo want. They want victory over. MLK said it seeks to liberate American society and share in the self-liberation of all the people, right? Was MLK's proper goal. That's liberation. This, what Robin DiAngelo is about, is attempted humiliation, and it creates bitterness and resentment in everyone. The goal should be unity. What do we have in common? And it's really not even that hard once you just decide that let's find it. And that's what builds actual relationship, not resentment. We're going to talk more about Robin DiAngelo tomorrow, but know that these protests won't stop because this toxic mindset is being pumped into our kids from an earlier age, and that's such a shame. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I want to talk about the riots and everything that's been going on lately. I've heard some people compare what's going on now with the Boston Tea Party, right? And the Boston Tea Party was a riot, and we're just in the same spirit as that. So let's take a minute here to talk about the Boston Tea Party. Now, I want to be clear, I wasn't there, so I'm not exactly sure what went down at the Boston Tea Party. And history can be tricky, right? Because we're all making movies in our heads. Always. We're always making movies in our head about things that have happened in the past. And so let me ask you this. Imagine the Boston Tea Party. Like in your brain, like play the movie in your head about the Boston Tea Party. And really think about the details. So where was it? What time of day? What was the mood? What was the energy? How many people were there? What were they wearing? What was the build up to it, like that day? Just paint the movie in your head of the Boston Tea Party. Because we all have heard of this, right? So we all have that movie. And just play it in your head for a minute here. It's really interesting. If we ever come up with a machine that you can like hook up to your brain and whatever you're thinking shows up on a TV as a movie, it'd be amazing if you put 100 people up, 100 Americans, you line them up and they each hooked up so you can see what they're thinking. And say, oh, think about the Boston Tea Party. There'd be 100 different movies. 100 completely different movies in every way. Which is wild because how can we even function? Like how do we even communicate about the Boston Tea Party if our perceptions of it can be so very different? So I want to, that being said, I want to just throw a couple data points in your head and see how it compares to the movie that you were playing in your head. So the protest was specific, so after I want to do this, I want to then white-splain how a real riot should be conducted. Should I not? That's like a thing, I want to white-splain. So I'm going to do some white-splaining in a minute here. But first, the protest was against a specific target, right? It was the British East India Company, which was a monopoly controlled by the king. It was in response to a couple different things, but specifically the Tea Act of 1773. So it was against the British East India Company. So it was on December 16th, 1773. So it was probably cold. Was it cold in the movie that you had in your head? Was it December 16th in your head? For me, it wasn't. When I played in my head, it's summertime. So it's cold. It was December 16th in Boston. There were between 30 and 130 people. So how many people did you have in your head? I had a lot. I had like 500 people maybe. It was a pretty small group. It could have been just 30 people. It was called the Sons of Liberty, this group. They dressed up as Mohawk warriors for some reason. I don't know why. So in your movie, what were they wearing? Were they dressed up like Indians? They boarded 3 British ships. It was near midnight. It was in the cover of night. It was moonlit, very covert, which is interesting because maybe it was like quiet. I have this like everyone's like roused up and fired up and like they got like torches and they're angry. but it may have been really a quiet, covert operation in the middle of the night. I don't exactly know. I don't know if anyone does. So 3 British ships, they got on the ships, and then they dumped over 342 chests of tea into the harbor, and it was over in 3 hours, and they all went back home. No one on the ships were harmed in any way. There was no violence whatsoever, no confrontations. There was one item that was broken that day. It was a padlock on one of the ships. And that padlock was actually the personal property of the ship's captain, and it was replaced by the Sons of Liberty the next day. You heard that right. The one piece of property that was harmed, other than the tea, was replaced by the rioters the next day. I wonder how that went down, right? Like one of the Sons of Liberty went back, he's like, hey, listen, that tea last night, sorry, not sorry, but we are sorry about the lock. So here's your lie. Like, did they hand deliver it? Did they like mailed it to him? Like, how did that go down? Nothing was looted or stolen from the ship, not even the tea. One man did try to steal some tea, but everyone called him out on it and they stopped him. Some of the Sons of Liberty, they swept the decks of the ship clean before they left. They left the ship cleaner than when they got there. And then Ben Franklin insisted that the Sons of Liberty pay back the British East India Company for the lost tea. It was like 1.5 or 1.7 million in today's dollars. And Ben Franklin said he'd do it himself if he had to. I don't know what ended up with that process, but like that was the philosophy, that was the thought behind this. Like, oh, you guys gotta pay for it. Like we're like, it's cool that you did it, I get it, but you gotta pay for it back, right? So the Sons of Liberty, they didn't steal anything, they didn't loot, they didn't break or destroy, they didn't light anything on fire. I had torches in my movie for some reason. They didn't light anything on fire. They didn't break any windows. They didn't threaten anyone. They didn't rampage down the streets demanding justice. They weren't against the king, so they decided to loot the local Walmart. It was perfectly, specifically targeted. That is civil disobedience. Civil disobedience, people have this idea of civil disobedience that it's, I'm angry at something, so I'm gonna break laws. No. Civil disobedience is when you are specifically breaking an unjust law. So Rosa Parks, the unjust law, and there's a whole backstory to this too, which is really interesting, but the unjust law was black people have to sit on the back of the bus. So Rosa Parks decided to light the CVS on fire. No, that was the unjust law was black people have to sit on the back of the bus. So Rosa Parks decided to break windows she broke that one specific law. That's civil disobedience. I want to talk about the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. for a minute here. And I'm not supposed to because that's the white-splaining part, but whatever. First thing to know about MLK, he probably won't exist in a few years, which is wild to think about. His memory, his legacy, his message won't exist anymore. It's already being erased from the history books as we speak. You know him, obviously, and he's just like, he's in the American conscience, right? He's part of American legend. So of course you know him, but your kids or grandkids will have never heard of him. And one day you'll be old and you'll be with your grandkids or great-grandkids and you'll talk about the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and they will say, who? I promise you. And it's because his message doesn't fit the message of today's activists. His entire philosophy is, first of all, Jesus. It's the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. The Reverend part's been taken off of his name. All right, so it went from Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. to Martin Luther King Jr., and now it's just MLK. And I've fallen for that already a couple times here just for shorthand, but so the Reverend part, like the Jesus part's certainly taken out. It's not compatible with the activists today. But also just love, non-violence, right? That we can't have that in the movement today. So Martin Luther King Jr. is going to be erased completely. So let's do a little cultural appropriation here when it comes to this. So let me quote MLK here. Nonviolence has also meant that my people, in the agonizing struggle of recent years, have taken suffering upon themselves instead of inflicting it on others. How good is that? Today, the goal is to inflict pain on other people, to show white people what it's like to be uncomfortable. And MLK said specifically, he said, no, nonviolence is about not inflicting pain on others. And not only not inflicting pain, but taking it on yourself. Suffering, like adding the suffering to you. Completely different than the philosophy today. It has meant that we do not want to instill fear in others or into the society of which we're a part of. The movement, this is what we quoted a second ago, the movement does not seek to liberate Negroes at the expense of the humiliation and enslavement of whites. It seeks no victory over anyone. It seeks to liberate American society and to share in the self-liberation of all the people. Violence as a way of achieving racial justice is both impractical and immoral. Now, I'm not unmindful of the fact that violence often brings upon momentary results. Nations have frequently won their independence in battle, but in spite of temporary victories, violence never brings permanent peace. It solves no social problem, it merely creates new and more complicated ones. Violence is impractical because it is a descending spiral ending in destruction for all. It's immoral because it seeks to humiliate the opponent rather than to win his understanding. It seeks to annihilate rather than convert. Violence is immoral because it thrives on hatred rather than love. It destroys community, makes brotherhood impossible. That's what we talked about in the last segment, relationship. It leaves society in monologue rather than dialogue. That's good. Violence ends up defeating itself. It creates bitterness in the survivors and brutality in the destroyers. And then he goes on, he talks about civil disobedience. So today, because one of the highest virtues in life today is being comfortable, right? We're so prosperous, we just have to be comfortable all the time. All of our comforts need to be met constantly. So because comfortableness is of such a high virtue, the goal is to never suffer. So instead, we got to make other people suffer. And here's MLK saying that, no, we're willing to suffer. We're ready to suffer when necessary for a higher calling, because there are things of higher calling than being comfortable. And he also says you need to protest. Here, we will do this peacefully, openly, cheerfully, because our aim is to persuade. So you need to protest cheerfully. Again, all this white-splaining, I know, right? I've heard the people say, oh, you white people, you criticized Kaepernick when he did his protest, and now you criticize riots and protests in the streets and all that stuff. So how do you want, white people, how do you want us to protest properly? Do whatever you want, I don't care. But the reason why people didn't like the Kaepernick thing is because he tied it into the flag. He tied it into America, that America's race is at its core, and that's not true. There's never been a more open and diverse nation in all of the world. MLK knew it. And we still know it. I want to prove that with a story next about a family from Nigeria. We'll wrap the show up with that. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. I want to wrap up the show here with a story of a young boy. His name is Tani. The story starts with his dad. So it's 2016. Tani was 6 years old, and they lived in the capital of Nigeria. And his dad owned a printing shop. And some guys came in, 4 guys came in with a thumb drive, and they wanted this guy, the dad, to print out 25,000 copies of a poster. So the dad went home and looked at the poster. And the poster said, no to Western education and kill all the Christians. The 4 men who came into the shop were members of Boko Haram, the terrorist group. You know, the other day we were talking about watching your parents make a tough decision, right? The right decision when it was hard, and I was soliciting stories of like when you were a boy, you're 5, 6 years old, and you see your parents make a really hard decision, but it's the right decision, and that changed your life when you saw it. You still remember it even though you were 5 or 6 years old, right? So for Tani's dad, he had a choice. He could complete this job for Boko Haram and work for a terrorist group and promote a message of killing Christians, which he was one, or say no and then get killed by Boko Haram anyway. So his dad was struggling what to do, and he's in his living room, and he doesn't know, and he could hear Tani and his friend in the front yard kicking a ball around, laughing and having fun. He didn't know what to do for the sake of his kids. He had 2 boys. And the fear is it wasn't anything new, really. I mean, Boko Haram at this point, they already kidnapped the 276 girls from that school, of course. There's many other attacks and abductions and bombs in Nigeria from Boko Haram. So it wasn't a new threat, but this was the first time it was really very specific to him. So he came up with a plan. His plan was he was going to tell the men the next day, sorry guys, I couldn't do it. Our printing press broke. Can you believe it? And then he was going to hand them back the flash drive and say, I didn't even look at this because there was no need to. Our printing press was broke. Really sorry about that. So he did that, and it didn't work. The next day, the men came to his house. He wasn't home, but his wife and kids were. Now, his wife grew up Muslim and spoke Arabic, so she knew what they were saying in Arabic, and she knew that she was going to get raped. So she fell to her knees, and she said in Arabic, I'm begging you, I'm begging you, I'm begging you, over and over and over. And they asked her if she was a Muslim, and she said yes, and they left her. And the dad said, we got to get out of here. So they moved to the country to escape Boko Haram. A couple months later, they heard people trying to climb their fence. And the people they said, you've escaped us for too long. We know you're inside. So the dad gathered the family in one of the bedrooms, and they prayed together because only a miracle could get them out of this, right? What are they going to do? So the plan he came up with was to open the kitchen door out to the back of the house and announce himself and say, I'm here, and give himself up, and hoping that giving himself up, they would leave his family alone. Imagine that being your last ditch effort. So think about the riots, right? If these riots ever come to your home, I don't think they will, and maybe we could talk about that another day, but imagine if these rioters or looters, they come to your home and they're gonna kill you and your family, you think they are, and your last ditch move is, I'm just gonna walk outside and hopefully they only kill me. And that's the last thing you plan on ever doing in your life. I can't even fathom it. I can do the best I can to imagine that, but I can't even imagine that. So he opened up the door. He said goodbye to his family. He opened up the door. And when he did, one of the men who was climbing the fence mistook him for a police officer. And the guy shouted, it's the police, let's go. And they ran away. I think the guy thought he was a cop because he thought, well, no way would he just walk out the door like that. Amazing. So the dad knew that we got to get out of Nigeria for good. So they decided to move to the most racist country in the world, America. He said, I have to flee to the land of the dreams. Stayed with a family in Dallas, and then they ended up buying 4 tickets to New York City. It was 40 hours on the bus to get there. They slept in the basement of a pastor's house. The dad got a job as a night cleaner in some restaurant in Brooklyn, $6 an hour, 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. Reminder, in Nigeria, he was the CEO of his own company. And here he's cleaning up restaurants at night for $6 an hour. In less than a year, they moved 5 times, and Tani never complained. Never complained. Fast forward, February 2018, Tani's 7, 8 years old, and he's in school. And one period a week, every Thursday, there'd be a special chess class. So the kids would go, it's like a special elective kind of thing, and the kids would break up into pairs, and they had a chess teacher come in and teach them and all stuff. And it turns out Tani is a chess prodigy. He was just whipping through these puzzles, obviously crushing the other kids. He would memorize these 100-year-old chess matches and just crazy stuff. So his mentor said, you got to join the local chess club. But the local chess club wouldn't let him in because he was black. Of course not. Of course they let him in. There was a fee, they waived it. Every chess tournament cost $50, and they waived it when they found out what his situation was. Within a year, Tani was the city champion for chess. He could checkmate your opponent in 8 moves. His opponent in 8 moves. The guy's like a whiz. There's this great line from his dad. His dad says, for a lot of children his age, chess is fun, chess is engaging, but for Tani, chess represented what he found in America, and that is control. He lived a life out of control, right? Dictated by Boko Haram terrorists, a life of fear, but chess, there was order. Certain pieces can do certain things, right? There was order to it, and there was control, and he was in control of it. His dad's now a real estate agent. His mom is a home healthcare aide. And he has 3 years still to become the youngest chess grand champion. Some kid from Russia has the record, 12 years, 7 months. He still has 3 years to do it. Tani does. He'd be the youngest. Also, he'd be the 4th black grandmaster. There's 1,300 grandmasters total. He'd be the 4th black and the 2nd African American. And here's the key line. Tani said, in chess, it doesn't matter if you're black or white. If you attack and defend well, you have an equal chance of winning. And that's what's so beautiful about it. You know what else? It's also true in America. True story. Thanks, Slater. See you tomorrow.